Please watch for other open mic announcements, and those are typically found on the Pat Conroy Literary Center Facebook page. Open mic nights feature short readings of 3 to 5 minutes by each of the writers in many genres. And this evening, we have a small but mighty lineup of readers. So, again, welcome everyone, and let's get started. We'll do a round robin of readers, and then I will again introduce James Allen Gill and share his bio along with some praises when the time comes. So, without further ado, Estelle Ford Williamson, you are first in the lineup, and Ashley Roberts, you are in the queue. So, Estelle, welcome.
Thank you. I am going to get to a copy of my story. Hold on. The story is called Expected to Recover. It's a short story. It might go a little bit more than 3 to 5 minutes. I hope not. Expected to Recover. We have art that we shall not die of reality. Friedrich Nietzsche. Her son proudly gripped the door handle and pulled it open, letting humid air escape towards them, wrapping wet atmosphere around them as they entered the greenhouse-like building. It was built in the midst of a large, well-lit warehouse with skylights. It was not far from the Atlanta airport. "Come on, Gabe," she called to her 4-year-old, who was now distracted by a large cage set under a table. The table surface held vases of every kind, tall, clear cylinders, ruby-colored glass, chubby and round ceramics. Large coolers with half-fogged windows showed their contents, large bunches of cut flowers, leather leaf and baby's breath, and various vines for fillers. Roses of every color and length, Gerber daisies, regular daisies, white and lavender asters. Greta wanted to grab them all, clasp them to her chest, and breathe in their exotic, calming smells. But she could delay. She had business here. She was carrying her and Robin's second child, too early to tell, boy or girl, and she and Gabe would need a nap soon. "Hi, doggy." Caleb was chatting to something in a kennel, a large, long-nosed hunting dog, such as on the cover of Garden and Gun. Stuck its long nose out, offering it for petting. The late 20s blonde wearing hole-endowed jeans approached from the side of the coolers. She tossed her hair and moved to the vase counter. "Hi, I'm Rhonda. What can I help you with?" Greta noticed her layers of grunge wear and friendly face. Good setup for a young person, she thought. Steady income, at least during wedding seasons. "I need white flowers for a wedding coming up." Rhonda's brow crinkled in a frown. "Depends on how far out it is, and when." 6 weeks out, March 5th. Early spring. That's doable. Her face relaxed. "Doggy, doggy," Gabe exclaimed. "Can he play?" Rhonda's face winced a bit. "He's not really a play dog, honey," she began. "Is he a service dog?" Greta tried, afraid to be wrong or right. God knew what he was in service for. "He lays across me or next to me at night. I have epilepsy, and I can go into grand mal seizures if I don't get meds right away. He senses changes in the chemistry of my breath and wakes me before I'm in big trouble." "He's smelling your breath?" "I forgot how many thousands of sensors there are in that cute nose," she said. "How did you get your dog?" "Brady," she smiled, "chose him out of a litter. He was friendly but calm, something that's real important. And then there's a long, expensive training in North Carolina where he learned how to pick up the smell and sound the alarm." Greta pulled her cardigan sweater across her. "How does he help you?" "He's got a very large number of sensors in his nose. He's been trained to smell whatever I give off when I'm about to have a real bad seizure. He alerts me, and I take meds to prevent one. That's the kind where you have big convulsions, thrash about on the floor, or risk falling or choke to death." "That's awful." Greta stretched her sweater closer, chilled by the low temperature in the greenhouse. "Not to get too personal, but you could have a catastrophe any day." "Doesn't happen that often, but it could happen." Wow. She went on to tell Rhonda what she wanted in the way of flowers. She was helping her hardworking nurseryman Wendy get ready for her wedding, and she promised she'd scout out flowers and order them if the price was right. Rhonda's pieces and selections of white flowers were amazing. She gave her a big order: church reception, bridal bouquet, attendance flowers, and boutonnieres. While she was paying the deposit, she took in the flora's natural beauty, trying to think what could have caused her to live such an altered life. Did someone hit you? Hard. Greta couldn't believe she just said that. Rhonda flinched and looked at Greta like she'd found out a secret she wanted to hide. Her eyes grew a little narrow as she looked at her new customer. A flush rose in Greta's face. She didn't know where the question came from, but it arose from somewhere so clearly, like deep knowledge her body was letting go of. The question struck home with Rhonda. Yeah, my mother's boyfriend. He hit me lots. Not identified until I was attempting college and having trouble. I started having seizures. That must have been a tragic time for you to go through that abuse, and then later to have such a burden to bear every day. They went on to talk business, and something about Greta must have seemed safe, so Rhonda told her to friend her and Brady on Facebook. That night, after she put Gabe to bed, showered, and got ready for bed, she took time to scroll through Rhonda's social media page. It was just her and Brady, outside a lot. Brady chasing a frisbee, rolling in late winter grass. Not many friends, no parents, understandably. The mother hadn't stopped the violence, and her father was probably too ashamed he'd left her exposed to the damage she'd live with the rest of her life. An image rose in Greta's mind, a small freckle-faced boy with a baseball bat in his hands and red in his cheeks attacking the family car. A large cherry-colored sedan was surrounded by splintered grass. He'd slammed both sets of double headlights, hitting them over and over until they were useless. Bruce, what are you doing? She'd screamed. That bad car, it hit my baby brother. Those lights hit him in the head. I'm killing them. He whacked the front of the car again. She was 7 and Bruce was 4 and baby Mike was a toddler, a year and a half. She was in charge of her young brothers in the house, but Mike got out, scrambling down front stairs and running toward her father's car as he returned from work. Dad didn't see baby Mike. The baby was knocked over by the car and her father got out, only to see a small lump of a body in the driveway, crying and bleeding from the impact. Dad yelled for Mom to come from the back of the house, and they'd taken him to the ER for treatment. The MRI didn't show damage. He was expected to recover. Later, her father made her hold her hands out. She could still feel the leather belt doubled and striking her hands till they stung like fire. Bruce had rushed to the garage, grabbed a kid's bat, and took off for the car. They were both punished for a long, long time. Time shift. Bruce, it's Greta. She called her brother, figuring he would still be up. Hi, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, not this time anyway. I just called because I was remembering something. What? Remember when Dad hit Mike with the car and knocked him down? Yeah, I remember beating out the headlights on the new car because they'd attacked my little brother. I was so mad at that bad car. And we didn't have dessert for a month. I just connected Mikey and all the trouble he had later in life. Like not finishing high school and going off on his own. They thought he was lazy, not doing his work like they were. Well, remember, he had trouble in school from the beginning, even though Mom held him back till he could be an older kid in preschool, Greta said. He just seemed to always have his own way of doing things, and it got him in trouble a lot in school. And after he left, Bruce was saying, hitchhiking to San Francisco and never calling home so we'd know where he was. Greta heard her voice rising, full of fright she felt then. Worried Mom crazy. I know he's out there somewhere, but I'm not sure where. Have you heard anything? Greta asked. As abruptly as the flick of a light switch, Bruce's mood turned dark. I don't care about him, she heard from across the miles. Let him be lost as far as I'm concerned. He's just found a way to let others take care of him. You don't think a hard hit to the head as a toddler had anything to do with his inability to hack school later on? Greta asked. Why do you bring it up? It was never talked about when we were growing up. Maybe Dad intended to hit him, never had much use for us kids. Greta felt as if a fist struck her chest. Her father, now dead, wanted to maim his youngest? It was hard to believe he would do that, but he did have a mean streak, especially when drinking. Her mother, also gone at a young age, tried to protect him during his rage-filled fits. The experience left a mark on them all. Was Bruce turning on her? Did little Gabe inherit his meanness gene? Did she as well? You're one of those vaxxers who thinks Mike needs a shot of something to help him overcome laziness. Doesn't work that way, sis. She hurried off the phone. Greta wondered if Bruce had been drinking or what changed his mood so quickly, but things had been getting testy lately, the few times they got together. Christmas dinner had been horribly embarrassing as Bruce took shots at her husband's Robin's CDC research job. She figured he'd forgotten her own public affairs work there. She'd left the job to raise Gabe and this baby. She went into Gabe's room to make sure he was still asleep. She looked at the stack of baby clothes she'd gathered from storage in his room, getting ready to move them into the nursery. It was still long ways off, but it was time to start making the transition. And it was time to say goodbye to strange pronouncements from Bruce. It would not be family as she'd known it if she'd cut off contact with her brother. Family would have to come from her and Robin and Gabe and the new one, and Mike for however much family contact he could stand. Estrangement, she reflected, was the unmistakable sign of family trauma. She would have to wait until early morning to call Robin, as he was in East Africa and was 6 hours away. She was frequently in this position, far removed from her closest ally. Robin wasn't available when she called him. Greta decided to return to the flower lady. The next day, Gabe opened the greenhouse door and smugly waited for her to pass through. She smelled the flowers and knew now why they affected her so. They reminded her of her Dunwoody home she grew up in. Her mother frequently ordered vases of flowers or picked out selections at Publix. No occasion, just to beautify their large home. The fragrance brought back good memories of those displays. Now that she was connecting with the memory of her alcoholic father, many scenes were fitting together like a complicated jigsaw puzzle that suddenly looked solvable. Click. Her father's rage was also directed at her mother. Greta witnessed much of her distress, but not all. Click. Her mother used flowers to get over her anger and fear, turned to something beautiful, and Greta wanted to do the same. Click. Maybe Rhonda needed a partner or an assistant for a couple of hours every once in a while, or just a friend. No reason family had to be blood relatives. Maybe she shouldn't cut Bruce off totally. Otherwise, Mike called Bruce, and she would miss hearing about him. Hard to tell what she should do. She'd just wait and see. In the meantime, she'd talk flowers with Rhonda. The humidity and comforting bunches of multicolored flowers and lush greenery enveloped her. Rhonda was watering some of the ballooning flowers with a plastic watering can. She carefully pushed Mums aside to reach the carnations at their side. Good morning, back for another wedding, she teased. No, I want to treat myself this time, Greta laughed. You've had to travel a long way just to pick up some flowers for home. Gabe kneeled beside the crate holding Brady, talking softly to the dog. I know, Greta said, smiling. Have you ever thought of getting some of the flowers I've seen in England and Ireland? The orange crocosmia, like tiny tall iris. They actually grow along the Irish roadsides, along with pink fuchsia, as well as the natural heather. Rhonda looked at her incredulous. Most flowers we get in the U.S. are grown in Colombia and Peru. Refrigerated freight from Europe is very expensive. Well, maybe I can stop pretending I know something about what you do, Greta laughed. How about you tell me about the flower business? Rhonda grinned and handed her the watering can. The end.
Thank you, Estelle. Grinned and handed her the watering can. Yes. Okay, Ashley, you are next at the mic, followed by Jessica. Ashley, it is all yours.
Thank you so much. I have three short poems I'll read. And I primarily write poetry. This one is something that I rarely do. I don't usually look for prompts. I usually just write cathartically. But this one was a prompt about a bridge as a function, as a metaphor for a family relationship with complex or contradictory dynamics. And it says, I'm looking for a bridge to you, Daddy. With each man I live and die for, I get one step closer to understanding you and why you left and why you avoided and why you drink and why you cheated, and why you hurt, and why you think, and why you love me so completely, so obsessively, but could not gift me your presence, and why you thought the gift was your absence, and why you needed so much time alone, and why you could never stay too long, and why you and I are kin, and why I must find you through men. And I'm looking for a bridge to you, Daddy. I think I finally found the one who'll rise to meet me. Despite every way, he is just like you. He'll do it for me, Daddy. So that was that one. And thank you. Let me find my other one, which is on my phone. Can you still see me? Hold on. Let's see. Okay. Here we go. All right. This one is called Icarus, and the second one's called Icarus 2. Icarus, you're an infidel. Keep your hands where I can see them. What am I supposed to do now? Your face is blistered by the sun, and I can't pretend not to see it. I put the evidence in a pile on your table. I didn't need any of it to know. Am I in love or in denial? I believe in our love. I believe in myth too. I'm loving you with my eyes wide open. That's not weakness. That's not blind reflection. Devotion with discernment, despite even though fully aware of the blisters. Just don't tell me they aren't there. Rise, Icarus. Let's be a phoenix instead. Let me collect your pieces like Isis desperately gathering Osiris. Let's make Horus. I'll be the mother of the world. And then this is Icarus 2, which is a different perspective of the same situation. I loved you, Icarus, you infidel, while I told you that you flew too close to the sun. While I told you not to lie to me about your face being blistered, I carried the sun in my bare hands because I was accustomed to the heat. I wanted to move it further from you so you wouldn't fall because I loved you, that is all. I loved you, Icarus. I cannot deny my hands are blistered too, and my face is red too. And you are dead, not to me, but to yourself, and I cannot deny that I too am flawed. Maybe we can rise from this together. My stubbornness will not let us be torn asunder. Even while my chest is filled with thunder, I loved you too, Icarus, and I too am burned. And that's my work. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. Okay, Jessica, you are next at the mic, and then I will share and we will move on to our featured author. So, Jessica, thank you. You're on mute, Jessica.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My first poem tonight was inspired by Marc Chagall's painting Couple in a Blue Landscape, which is why it's called Blue Landscape. They lie in the curve of the crescent moon, a cosmic cradle, a gondola hovering in the sky. He admires her lapis hair, her bare shoulders and sodalite skin. 1,000 shades of blue flicker, rendering them luminous and ethereal as mermaids. Blue-green women with bodies as ripe as dark plums. Floating in a cerulean spotlight, her bare toes pearly and stricken blue, she strokes his hair, whispering of the secret world swelling in her stomach. Her bare belly echoes the curve of the moon, a swallowed pearl. Seraphim twirl in the richness of a cobalt sky, swooping and diving like silent, moonstruck birds. Missile-shaped fish swim in the depths where elemental spirits swirl and crest like waves. Mythological beasts stalk this enchanted forest, gone as blue-green as the flame in an emerald's eye. Thank you. My next poem was not inspired by the storm we had today, but I decided to read it. It's called The Color of Rain. The air is filled with the green, expectant scent of rain. Waves ripple in the canal, dappled with light, the color of old coins. Birches stand at the water's edge, pale and slender, streaked with moss, the chartreuse of spring, bathed in the afterglow of a passing storm. Azaleas nod like sleeping children, glowing impossibly pink against the gray haze of coming rain. Thank you. I tend to think in images, so a lot of my poetry is inspired by artwork. My final poem, Stockings, was inspired by Dorothea Lange's photography, especially her 1934 portrait, Mended Stockings. It's called Stockings. The delicate, cobwebbed stockings are scarred with stitches. Fresh tears gape at kneecap and heel from a day of pounding pavement, standing in soup kitchen queues. They are rinsed of the day's grime of sweat and silt and hung to dry, fluttering on the clothesline or draped over a chair. The fading luxury of silk, her last pair. Every night she attempts to repair the damage, to weave them into wearability. Runs are scratched into silk, where they will spread like routes and rivers on a cartographer's map. She bathes her blistered, calloused feet in the tin tub, her skin cracked and leathery as old shoes. In the morning, she crosses legs sheathed with spider webs, arranging her skirt to hide the latest darning. These poems were excerpts from my poetry collection's Defense Mechanisms and Phoenix transformation poems. I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.
Beautiful, Jessica. Thank you so much. Thank
Thank you.
you. I am going to share a short poem that I wrote at the recent Lux Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway. One of the workshops had prompters, but physical prompters. So I picked a little glass bluebird. This poem is titled Feathered Friends on Fripp Island. Red-winged blackbird perched in the wax myrtle at the beach. Blue jays quip high atop the tallest palm. Pelicans sail along the partly cloudy skyline. Gulls laugh at springtime tourists. Least tern dips over feeding dolphin pod. Killdeer tippy-toe along the sandbar. Carolina wrens chatter balancing on cordgrass. Chickadees chirp among the Yupon holly. But the bluebird sits quietly in his faded suit of red, white, blue, feathered friends on Fripp Island. Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So it is my pleasure to introduce James Allen Gill. James Allen Gill was raised in a town with no stoplights by a family of coal miners, then attended Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, where he earned degrees in history and creative writing. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including Colorado Review, Crab Orchard Review, The Common, Sou'wester, The Laurel Review, Midwestern Gothic, Fried Chicken and Coffee, Atticus Review, Book of Matches, and Prime Number magazine. He has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and is the 7-time winner of the J.D. Supra Reader's Choice Award for his writing in the legal technology industry. He currently lives with his wife Brittany in Minneapolis. Some praises. Not Dark Yet unfurls like a fantastic roll of film, capturing the hidden pockets of wonder in the lives of the denizens of James Allen Gill's Illinois town of Matton. People fall in and out of love, race cars, make friends, make tracks, as ordinary lives reveal the extraordinary, all the while wrestling with the fundamental question, can you really live the life you want and still please the people who love you? Whitney Otto, New York Times bestselling author of How to Make an American Quilt and 8 Girls Taking Pictures. One more. Gill writes, with grace and humor and pain about small town life. This evocative chronicle of plain lives, in crisis, plain lives in crisis, belongs on the same shelf as the stories of Bobby Ann Mason and Raymond Carver. Poignant and powerful. Benjamin Percy, author of The Ninth Metal, Red Moon, and Thrill Me. Welcome, James Allen Gill. We look forward to your reading and sharing. And if I missed anything in your bio that you would like to share, please do so. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. Thanks to the Pat Conroy Center and Jonathan Haupt for inviting me. It's a real pleasure. Thanks to the readers who came before me. You all were great, and it was a pleasure to listen. So my story collection, put my glasses on because you know how it goes. My story collection has been in the works for a long time, and I've published these stories over, I think the first story I published in 2002. Maybe I'm dating myself. And just sort of as you write, as you go, I continued to write stories about the people in this town, in this place. Um, my my mentor, Kent Harif, the novelist Kent Harif I studied with, he pretty early on told me to take Faulkner's advice and carve out your postage stamp of land and set all of your characters in that. And he did that as well with his Colorado novels. So, I grew up in, as you said, in a town without stoplights. That's the way that I have figured out how to explain just how small it was. Because a lot of people think they're from a small town and then they'll be like, oh, it's got 40,000 people or something. And so, we had to go to the next town over in driver's ed to practice stoplights. And when I would tell people that, they're like, oh, that's really small. So that's where I'm from. And so kind of early on in my life, in a town that small, everybody knows everybody else's business. There's really no privacy. But something I noticed is that there were a lot of stories that people ignored, and they had to know them. They had to see them. They were there, but nobody talked about them or nobody brought them up or whatever. I just felt like there were all these stories kind of lying under the surface. So that became my thing. I wanted to tell those stories. I wanted to tell the stories that didn't get told about the characters who didn't get written about. And so that's sort of what started this whole thing. So all the stories in this collection, they're not interconnected in any kind of way other than that they're all set in the same place in about the same time period over a decade, we'll say. And so these are the lives that are forgotten and kind of run under the surface. In fact, the first story in the collection is called Rock of Knowledge, and it's based on this a real thing in the town where I grew up. There was a rock of knowledge. It was an old well in front of a diner, and it was sort of legendary. It was like the landmark in town, and older men would always talk about hanging out at the Rock of Knowledge. By the time I was born, it was gone. And so it was this sort of legendary thing. And so I started thinking about the idea that, they had just sort of taken the top off of it. And so I thought, like, this well is still there. It's still under the ground. It's still under the surface. And so that sort of became this sort of metaphor for this man who becomes obsessed with the past and uncovering the past, and he's sort of missing his own life as it's happening to him. And so there's sort of this parallel of things under the surface. So that kind of sets things up. But I think for tonight, I'm gonna read. Um, it was published as a single story, but in this collection, it frames it. So the first part is the prologue, and then you have all of the stories you kind of go through, and then you end with this story about this character named Clarency. And Clarency is, well, we used to just call people like this the town bum. But now we would say, that he was an unhoused person, a homeless person. Um, but in small towns, there's usually kind of one person like this who everybody knows, everybody sees, um, but he just sort of drifts along under the surface. And so in kind of both of the towns that I lived in my younger years that sort of fused to become Maiden. Um, uh, there were two men who were kind of like this, and in the second town where I lived when I was a little older, I actually there was this man named Clarency, um, and I actually worked with some men who knew him and like interacted with him and had gone to school with him. It was fascinating to me that this person who everybody sort of ignored or dismissed um, had this whole history, and it was very interesting. So Clancy shows up on the fringes of several stories throughout the collection. He'll kind of appear and maybe interact with some characters, and so I wanted to end the collection with his story, and so that's what I'll read to you tonight. So uh, it's called the Truth of Maton County, Ellen, and there's an epigraph from the Book of Psalms. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Maybe truth is in the land, the soft, rolling prairie, smooth and glaciated, rising up into hazy blue hills at the exact point where the ice sheets stop their slow descent from the top of the world, outlined against the sky like the curve of a lover's hip. The smell of dirt, freshly plowed in spring, falling on your face like the sweet breath before a kiss. The slow, wide river, coursing alongside the town, forever south to the sea. Maybe it can be heard in the song of the underground mine, machines tearing away the bituminous rock, carrying it through hollow shafts, then along the beltline to the tall gray silos where the raw coal is cleansed and treated and loaded onto train cars that shudder and quake as they lurch forward one by one beneath the tipple. Or is it in the vacant storefronts on Market Street, plate glass windows hung with for lease signs, the dark brick crumbling mortar, or the closed factory, empty above its weedy parking lot, surrounded by a rusty chain link that keeps no one out? In dilapidated mansions, beautiful and rotting on the bluff overlooking the river, or floating in the pillars of vapor above the power plant, smokestacks rising above the floodplain, a landlocked steamship that never moves. Can truth be found in the convenience store where old men sit drinking coffee, telling stories that are replaced by more stories? In churches filled each week with acolytes, apostles, and apostates, listening to hymns of work and toil and waiting for death's reward because there is no reward for the living? Can it be written on a page or found on a brass plaque memorializing things long forgotten? Is it gathered in low places like rainwater, running off the rocks into the pale dust and seeping into the ground like blood? Is it here, dear reader, Is truth found by uncovering our origins, like digging up the roots of a tree to find where its seed first sprang forth life? Or does it exist only in stories not heard by anyone at all? Moments that drift away like ash, echoing like the words of a lullaby sung above the cradle, never to be heard again. The old man named Clarency lives in a mausoleum because no one comes to visit the dead very often. Years before, the city of Maton bought him a mobile home because a patrolling cop found him frozen to the ground beneath the steel-girdered railroad bridge, asleep on the gravel lane that winds through the river levee's floodgate. There are no homeless shelters in Maton County because most people fear it would bring an undesirable element to the area. But after finding Clarency that way, the Council of Aldermen allotted $2,000 from the city's budget to find living quarters for him. The city commissioner's brother-in-law owned 2 trailers set in a field on the edge of town that he rented for $250 a month. So he sold the one in the poorer condition to the city and raised the rent on the other. For 6 years, Clarency lived there. Then a letter from the VA hospital in Peoria arrived saying his brother was dying. Guided by a brittle, sorry, my headphones interrupted me. I'm going to start over. He packed a few things in a small bag and started north that very evening, guided by a brittle and yellow fold-up road map that had been printed in 1940. On it, no thick blue stripes marked the interstates he followed, the underpasses he slept under, only pale thin lines of blacktop and gravel connecting towns across the prairies and woods. In a gas station, he studied a brand new map of Illinois, hung under plexiglass near the door, and saw at the very bottom where Maton County lay, a swath of green designating the whole area as the Shawnee National Forest. On his own map, the forest was much smaller, dotted with towns that no longer existed, roads now grown over. As he walked on beside 4 lanes of concrete, lined with fast food and convenience stores and other travelers far from home, he wondered where those people who lived there in 1940 had gone. Had the government bought them out? Had the forest crept closer and closer until tall stands of oak and maple and cedar grew against the sides of their houses, dropping leaves and limbs onto roofs? Or had the modern map makers simply found it easier to color the whole area a wilderness instead of marking every little village and hamlet and grouping of mobile homes? Found it easier to forget that anyone lived there at all. When he arrived at the hospital, his brother was still alive. For some, death lingers a while, and it would be 7 more months before he passed on. Clarency hadn't bothered telling anyone in Maton where he was, and when he finally returned, his trailer had been rented to 3 men working a contract for an asbestos removal company. He waited all the next day outside town hall until the city commissioner walked to his car. When he saw Clarency, all he said was, "We thought you were dead." And so tonight, he walks through town in his tattered clothes, never speaking to another living person, and goes to the cemetery with a rusty coffee can and an armload full of kindling to stay in the shelter of the old stone mausoleum, warmed by a small fire. Soon the firelight sends strange shadows across the walls, and he talks to the bones within them, tells them his whole life huddled there in the tomb, confesses his sins and his loves and his pain, and his voice carries through the trees and across the headstones, but his stories fall only on the ears of the dead. He awakes to the glare of sunshine leaking in around the copper door. It is cold in the crypt, the fire long gone out, and he rises stiffly and stretches, then moves to the entrance and pushes open the heavy door green with corrosion and disuse. The sun is bright and clear, and a heavy frost lies over the thick grass of the cemetery. He steps back inside and sweeps the floor with his foot, then picks up his plastic bags full of aluminum cans and walks through the headstones towards the road, looking back once at the mausoleum to check that the door is pushed to all the way. He scans the letters carved above the door and says, "So long, Mattingly," before turning to walk toward town. Clancy doesn't know the man whose grave he shares. Few in the town do, only that he died long ago, the dates carved into the granite blurred now with lichen and moss. An ancestor who'd arrived at this place when it was still wild, not looking for a home, but a place to rest. On the long march toward Vincennes and the British fort guarding the old Northwest, they camped here on the river bluff for its high ground, a defense against their human enemies and against the spring-flooded prairies cross-cut by 100 streams and creeks emptying into the river. There, a young man named Garrett Mattingly, who joined General George Roger Clark's expedition at its beginning in Pennsylvania, drew the morning watch. And when the sun broke above the hardwood on the opposite bank, it set the river afire. And he stood staring into the dawn until the sun shrank and the sky blued, hearing only the sounds of the woods and the murmuring of morning prayers from an old French priest who'd come with them from Kaskaskia. Mattingly would always remember that moment as the most peaceful in his life. Before they took up the march, he asked the priest what he'd been reading, and the old man opened a small leather-bound book and pointed to the words on the page, translating carefully as he read. "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" After the British were routed and the revolution ended, the men of Clark's army were paid with the land they had conquered, and Mattingly went back to that spot on the river and built his home there, and soon a small village grew up around him, and it was called Mayton. Now on this morning, more than 200 years later, Clarency is oblivious to this founding history. His main concern is to sell his cans, then to the grocery for potted meat and beans, a box of crackers, coffee, and if there's enough left over, a bag of tobacco and rolling papers. He's often pondered how much the heavy copper door of the mausoleum would bring if he could somehow get it to the salvage yard, that he could probably retire for the rest of his life from the proceeds. But the townspeople, who tend to go on about their days without noticing anything, would surely notice the door missing from the tomb and have him thrown in jail. At the very least, his sleeping quarters would be without a door, which on this cold February morning seems more valuable than money. He steps surely along the edge of the blacktop, searching the ditches methodically for anything that might be of use to him. Near a culvert that runs under the drive of the cemetery, he finds 3 beer cans, unopened, from where a carload of teenagers dumped them the previous night before being pulled over by the city police. He pops one and guzzles, the beer still cold as if kept on ice, and after he finishes it, he throws the can in a bag, opens a second, and begins walking. His arms begin to strain, but he pushes on. He wonders about the people who have thrown out the junk he collects, how over the years he has probably picked up something that had once belonged to every person in the town. And because of this, he is somehow tied up in the story of their lives. He considers that thought for a moment and finishes the second beer, puts the can in the bag, and opens the third. His load becomes heavier, and he feels like he is being weighted down by those stories, as if every person in Mayton rests on his shoulders, and then he becomes afraid. He remembers his mother teaching him about Jesus, how he carried the weight of all the world's sins when he died on the cross, and though Clancy never really believed all that much in such things, he believes now he understands that burden. The muscles in his arms begin to burn, and the cold air bites at his lungs, but now he is in town, and the people are starting to move about in their cars, going to work or school or to market or 1,000 other places that people need to be, and Clancy needs to be at the salvage yard. So he walks on, and he thinks of his mother. Once, when he was young, he rode with her and an uncle down to Kentucky to visit some relatives. Hills rose up from the flat fields, and at first he thought they were low storm clouds, but as they moved closer, he could see the thick canopy of trees and the chalky white rock outcrops. Clancy had the feeling that once they crossed over these hills, he would see the ocean. They wound through narrow valleys and over the wide river and finally came to the house of his mother's people. And then he realized there was nothing on the other side but more hills. Now he moves down the river bluff onto the floodplain where the salvage yard sits, and his step quickens at the sight of the semi-trailers full of scrap and the piles of twisted metal. And then off to the side of the road, he sees a roll of brand new copper pipe, most likely fallen from someone's truck, a plumber's perhaps. And though he can't imagine carrying another thing, he shifts the bags so that he holds them all in one hand and hoists the shiny copper tubing in the other, looping upright. He tells himself that he has to set the stories aside, that he cannot bear their weight along with this load, for truth must be sacrificed for survival here in Macon County. And with that, he begins to move down the sloped road, carrying only objects that can be crushed and melted down, objects that can be traded for money, objects that are free of the stories that were once contained within them, stories that now float above the town and out through all the earth and on to the end of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what a powerful reading. Does anyone have questions for James? James, do you have any follow-up comments to your reading?
Um, hmm. No, I was hoping for questions.
Oh, I think Jessica just came off mute, so.
Well, I was wondering, what percentage of each story would you say is based in facts and how much is imagined?
um, a lot of facts, but reimagined in many different ways. So like, Clancy is a great example. This man, like, he shows up in several stories. I describe him as he looked, as he was. The few interactions I had with him or that I saw other people have with him, I tried to capture as accurately as I could. But other than that, I kind of just invented these situations for him to be in and kind of thought about how, this character would be or act or how someone would end up in this way. Other things like in the thing I just read about the map of Illinois, that came from, I found this 1940s road map in a junk pile once, and I still have it somewhere. But I remember being fascinated with this old brittle map and how, like, just in the short time, pre 1950s, something as simple as a road map has changed drastically. And that there were no interstates, that you had to stop and go through every little town, that the forest wasn't as big. It was still a lot of little communities, and had that thought like, oh, that's kind of fitting. Like this place is forgotten. The map makers, people fly by on the interstate. No one stops and notices these things. So just little things like that um, come up in life, little details that are always there. I could probably point to a real detail in every story and say, oh, that comes from this, that comes from that. But the stories are all fashioned into their own thing, if that makes sense. So, yeah, fictional realism, I guess.
Would you say that growing up in such a small place, sort of fired your imagination?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was, she didn't have an imagination. This was also like, you know, pre-internet. Um, we didn't even have a public library when I lived there. I think they do have a library now, but when I didn't, there was no public library. There was no. We were part of a program called RIF, Reading is Fundamental, and like a couple, 2 or 3 times a year, they would like put books out in the school gym, and we were all allowed to get one free book. Um, and I just thought everybody got to do that. And then when I was an adult, I realized it was for underfunded schools to make sure that every kid had got at least one book a year. I love those books, and I read them all many, many times, cover to cover. I laid in the grass a lot and imagined and made up stories. I don't know, it was just this weird kid who rode his bike around town talking to himself all the time because I was always imagining something. And so just telling stories, I think, was a natural thing. And I come from a family of storytellers. I learned pretty early on that people were respected who could tell good stories. Like even in like kind of working class circles, like a person who could tell a good story and engage the group and make people want to listen. They were kind of admired. And so I had several people in my family who were like that. And so I aspired to do that too. But I didn't even know you could be a writer. I knew people were writers, but I don't know how you did it. And so I was always scribbling and writing, trying to do things. And then fortunately in college, I had a teacher that kind of took me under their wing, loaned me books and pointed me in a direction. So yeah, very grateful. Those are
I have
good
a
questions.
question.
Yeah.
I noticed that the mausoleum for me was an interesting symbol for the way that he found refuge in death. And I think about that often as I write is the idea of symbols just coming naturally as you hone your craft, or is it something that you feel like you were drawn to, or was it actually the fact, or is it the fact that that said something to you as a greater commentary on the society that you were living in?
Yeah. Wow. Those are all good questions. I'll try to take them one at a time. So yeah, the idea of symbols, um, I think, like you said, they have to come natural. As soon as you're like, oh, this tree symbolizes whatever, blah blah blah, like nobody will get that. You know what I mean? Or it'll be so heavy-handed, it'll be a turn off, right? Like, um, and so the thing I've kind of found is that I just try to tell the stories and I just try to describe things, as I would. Um, Pick up the images that are compelling to me, just naturally. And then in revision, as I'm going through, you start to see like it starts to come out in relief. Like maybe it's like, oh, I mentioned this thing like a couple of times, or like you might see these natural parallels, like where it's oh, like these kind of stand out. And so then you go back and it's like, okay, these things are kind of naturally rising up. How can I connect them, or how can I hone those into being a little more symbolic without being heavy-handed? So that's kind of the way I approach it. I think with the mausoleum, I um, I was always kind of fascinated. There were always like in all the kind of small towns where I grew up, and there would be these cemeteries, and there were always the old parts, and it was like nobody took care of those anymore. Like they were just you could barely read the names on them, and they were just sort of these forgotten things. And there would always be like a mausoleum in the middle, and it was always like who got that, right? And it was like I don't know. A lot of the times you didn't know who had that one or who that person was. It's like, oh, they must have been somebody important to have such a thing. And now, like, when you think about gravestones and things now, like, I don't know, you don't have those great markers anymore. They're kind of gaudy and they're kind of like, I don't know, absurd sometimes. And they're just, it's just like everything else. Everything's kind of prefabricated. Everything kind of looks the same now. And so I always thought about we used to have these great markers, but then nobody used them anymore, nobody whatever. And so as I was thinking about, you know, someone who was an unhoused person in these small towns where there are no homeless shelters, there are no services for the reasons that I said, people are like, oh, we don't want that element here. It's like, well, the element's here. They're just all camped in the woods or living in the mausoleum. And so that became fascinating for me. Like I was sort of thinking, like, man, if I didn't have a place to stay, I would go stay in that mausoleum because nobody goes checks that out. And at least it's got four walls and a roof. And so I just kind of like thought that would be a great place for Clancy to spend the night after he gets kicked out of his trailer. Um, and so then once I had him in there, then it's just this built-in, like everybody in the town ignores him. No one talks to him. And even when he goes to town hall and it's like, hey, what happened? They're like, we thought you were dead. And so now he lives with the dead, and he talks to the dead. And I don't know, there's something freeing about that, right? Like you could tell your whole life to the ghosts, in a way that you can't tell real people. So anyway, it sort of happened naturally. It was just sort of this image that I had in my head of these small town cemeteries with mausoleums. Nobody knew who they belonged to. And then it just kind of went from there. The symbol just kind of built from there. Yeah. This is a good question.
Speaking of symbolism, I really liked the ending, the idea that everything Clarence's been through, and it almost felt like he was remembering those scenes from his childhood almost as a prelude to a suicide or something. And then he finds the copper, and it feels like this symbol of hope. Like, now he has money, now he can do something.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that idea of being weighted down, and I think everybody knows that feeling, like just being alive on this earth, and you're just trying to get by. And it seems like as soon as you start to get a little bit ahead, there's something comes up, and then it's like, oh, here I am back in the hole again, and I got to dig my way out. I'm sure there are plenty of people who like have been more stable for more generations in a row. Maybe they don't feel that way, but um, I think for people who are just working paycheck to paycheck or just trying to get by, like that's a real thing. Like you're always just one event away from tragedy. And so then someone who's at the bottom rung of that in Clarency, this guy who's just completely outside of society. Yeah, he carries this weight, and I like the idea of the fact that he kind of carries the weight of the town, um, on his shoulders, in this way. He's the sacrificial lamb, in sort of a way, so that other people can live. Um, but that copper, um, I think at the time when I was doing this stuff, I was doing a lot of work with, I don't know, just helping people clean up junk in the old barns, and dealing with things, and been to the scrapyard a lot. And like copper was always, it really was like finding like gold in a way, because you could resell it for so much more. And like, if you found a bunch of copper wiring, like I worked where we had this setup where you could build a fire under this thing and burn all the rubber off of the copper and take it in. You get more money that way. And just the idea of people just eking out an existence. Um, so for someone like Clarency, to find this pristine copper tube, and he's right there at the salvage yard, like he doesn't even have to carry it that much further. It really is like this sort of symbol of hope, like that's all he needs to just keep going. He'll probably get, I don't know, $38 for it. That's, I don't know why I have that number in my head, but that's what I have in my head. He'll get $38 for that roll of copper. Which, I mean, it's probably a couple of months more that he can not have to worry about anything. That'll get him to the summer. It's February. Life's always a little easier in the summer. So, yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking about like for some people, finding a copper tube and three unopened beers is like a windfall. Like this might be the best day he's had in a long time. So yeah,
And they were still cold.
yeah, because it's right. It was a cold morning. Like how awesome is that, right? I don't know. I think it's easy to write bad news, right? And in all of these stories, like it can be kind of bleak. Like these characters are not. A lot of them are not doing well. They're on that edge, right? And I just feel like I said, I feel like that's a lot of people. But in each one, I try to find a little shred of hope, just a little something. It's not the big thing. You don't win the lottery. You don't, you know, have the miracle. It's like that story by Marquez. Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. He talks about consolation miracles in that, and I've always loved that idea where it's like I think in that one like uh, this blind man, like they tried to heal this blind man and he didn't get his sight restored, but he grew three new teeth. And I remember like that's a consolation miracle. My grandfather was blind and he also didn't have very many teeth. And so I remember thinking like he would be pumped to have three new teeth, even if he still couldn't see, like that kind of consolation miracle, I think is really important to focus on. Um, particularly as a writer, we all want that big epiphany, where it's like, oh, and then one day I figured it all out and everything went gloriously afterwards. That's not the way life works. And so some days you find three cold beers and a roll of copper, and it'll get you through for a few more months. Like that's a consolation miracle. So I really wanted to end with that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Jonathan, did you have a comment?
I do. Jim, I actually have two questions, but I would be remiss in my duty as Pat Conroy Literary Center Director if I didn't also point out that there was a figure in Beaufort, and indeed a tradition of figures in Beaufort, very much like Clarency. And one rather famously appears in Pat Conroy's novel, The Prince of Tides. And in the novel, he's called Mr. Fruit. In reality, the town knew him as Tutti Frutti. His real name was Wilson Burke, excuse me. And to read his obituaries, you'd think you were reading the obituary of a celebrity for the
Mhm.
town's unhoused man. Everybody knew who he was, and he figured prominently into several historical events. Rather famously, he liked to lead parades. He thought it was the coolest thing in the world to show up and be the grand marshal for parades. And one day he showed up, and the parade was a KKK rally, and he was an African American man, and they couldn't very well go through with the parade with him leading it, so they just kind of disbanded, right? So he had
Yeah.
this. There were legends and lore surrounding him. So I applaud you for finding the figure who can be that, who can be both on the fringes, but also sort of represent the soul of the town in his way, particularly in a collection in which the town becomes kind of the central character, not just the setting,
Mhm.
but a character, perhaps even the protagonist of the story. But that's not my question. I have two questions. One is, as someone who comes from a tradition of storytellers and is writing about a very small town where everybody knows everybody and everybody knows you and your family, what sort of responsibilities and risks did you feel about putting real facts, real people, or variations on them on the page?
Yeah. That's a good question. I feel like I've always, hide in fiction in that way. Like if someone, oh, like what about, well, it's fiction. I mean, it's not totally real. Like you could always hide in that. That's how I always did it. I feel like it's very different when you call something memoir or nonfiction. There's this real onus on like what that is, is this true, and I think that's kind of interesting in and of itself. I heard Pam Houston read once, and she said that all of her books are 78% true, and that her agent decides whether it's nonfiction or fiction. I thought that was hilarious. Um, like it's more of a marketing move than anything else. I don't know, but yeah, I always just thought of it as fiction. And honestly, I don't know. I just told the stories, and Kent Harif uh, told me once when I was first still trying to write very early on, I would sometimes write these stories set in the city. And I had no clue. I've since lived in the city. I live in the city now. I like living in cities. There's a lot more to do. Um, but at the time, I didn't know anything about living in a city other than like what I'd seen on television. And so I would try to write these city stories, and they just were so inauthentic. And I remember Kent asking me like why I did that, and I was like, well, because that's what things happen. And he was like, there are probably 1,000 writers currently who could write about Chicago. He said, you may be the only person to write about your town. And that really kind of hit me in a way where it's like when you're from such a small place, um, there's not a lot of people telling that story. Um, and even if there are a lot of people, percentage wise, that's still not a lot of people. You know what I mean? And so, like, my graduating class in high school was 27 people. Um, and so yeah, somebody's got to tell these stories. And so, and there are other writers in that area and other writers in that town, and you know, people do tell those stories, but I don't know, that sort of hit me in that way. So I was just like, I have to tell these stories as real and as authentic as possible. And so I do pepper in sort of these real people. And with this collection, it's been really great because I've had people from not from that place, from places far away, people from cities, people who maybe their experience is far away from the experience of these characters. And they've told me, like, I really connected with these people. This really meant a lot to me. I really like this. And at the same time, I've heard from people from back home who are like, um, this is really great. I recognize this thing, or, like, I remember sitting on the Rock of Knowledge with your dad, or like just, just things like this. And it's like, that's really fantastic that they can, like recognize these things that are real, but also know that these are just sort of my imaginations around these real things. So yeah, I feel like authenticity is the most important thing. Like, I always sort of like Pablo Neruda reading his poems to the coal miners in Chile. Like, that's what it's like, yeah, I want people, I want PhDs to be like, wow, your stories are like, those are really fun. But I also want, the coal miners back home to be like, yeah, I liked your stories. That's real stuff, And so I always kind of carried that desire to do both. And so that's sort of my marker is, what will the folks back home think?
Well said. I like that you are the chronicler for those who know or know at least part of the story because it's true for their experiences. But you're also inviting people across the threshold for whom this is a completely unfamiliar location. And it feels real. It feels, to use your word, authentic for both of them. On behalf of several members of our live stream audience, because I can sometimes see who's watching, I want to ask a question that I know they would ask if they were in the Zoom room. How did you find your publisher? How did you forge that relationship?
Yeah, sure. I kind of broke the rules, actually, in a way. So all of these stories, every story in this collection has been published in a literary magazine over the years. Um, and I, I sent it to agents. Agents liked it, but nobody buys stories anymore. Send it to independent publishers. It's not quite what we do. Send it to this, send it to that. I even sent it to one that I thought was just kind of a lock, like it was exactly what they published. And they're like, we don't want to publish it. Yeah, it was just sort of this thing, and so I don't know. I gave up on it a little bit, and I've started working on this novel. I've been working on this novel for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's finished. And so a couple years ago, sent that novel out to agents, secured an agent at a big five New York, top New York agency with the top agent at the agency. I was so thrilled. Signed a year contract. He sent it to lots of things, and then got some feedback, got some good feedback from some good places. No bites, and kind of immediately when we didn't get a bite within the first 2 months, um, he just completely ghosted. I would write, I would say, hey, what's going on? Hey, where are we going to try next? Whatever. And it was just like nothing. And so I became extremely just disenfranchised. Um, like, it made me just not want to write in a weird way. It's like all this work, and I'm sure all writers feel this. We put in this work, we put in this effort. I've done all the steps. I have an MFA. I've published 40 stories in literary magazines. I've gone to the conferences. I've got an agent now. Like, and then it's just no, 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 no. And so it was like, it became very like interesting for me. And my wife, who's a designer and an artist and typesetter and all these things, she was like, "What if we started a press?" And I was hesitant first. I was like, "I don't know, like, should I, shouldn't I?" And I started thinking about the way the world's changed, and the way um, media has changed, the way other artistic forms allow that, music, um, other things, people put their own stuff out all the time. Um, and I thought about one of the things that held me up was that, I used to teach, I was a college professor for 16 years. And so that specter of tenure was always out there. And I haven't been in academia for a decade now. And so it was like all those sort of obstacles were like, yeah, like, why not? I would rather share this with readers and get it into the world than set on it and not have it go anywhere. So we started doing research, um, distribution, different distribution channels, different ways to do this. We wanted it. We also wanted it to be like good looking books, like quality books. So many times you see self-published books and they look like self-published books. And so our goal was to like really create this high quality outlet for people who have kind of done all the steps. It's like I have good quality work and it's been vetted in every way possible, but the nature of corporate publishing now doesn't give us an outlet like that. I mean, Minneapolis, where I live now, we have all kinds of like independent publishers. Those independent publishers like Gray Wolf or Coffee House Press or whatever, they don't take unsolicited manuscripts anymore. You have to have an agent to get into these so-called independent things. So it's like, why not? And I think the final thing, just another Minneapolis shout out, but I saw this interview with Prince, and he was just talking about his issues with the record companies and different things like that. And he was like, if I put out my own music, the amount that I have to sell to break even is so much smaller than if I'm giving a cut to the record companies and giving a cut to the agents and giving a cut to that. And I thought, well, hell, if Prince does it, then, why shouldn't I give it a whirl? So shout out to Britt, my wife, who did a fantastic job designing the book, typesetting it. It's beautiful. It looks really good. She's also a killer editor who made these stories even better. So yeah, so that's what I did. I broke the rules, started my own press. So those of you out there who have had the same experience and come up against it, hey, send us your manuscript. We'll see what we can do. See if there's a place. So yeah.
What kind of books
That
do you
is, oh,
publish?
sorry,
Sorry,
Jessica.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering what kind of books you publish.
Yeah, I mean, the mission statement is something like uh, quality literary works that have been, for whatever reason, passed over. You know, um, uh, I think that's sort of the goal. You know what I mean? If you have a book and it's like, I think you should try the traditional route first. Like send it to New York. Like try to get an agent. Try to get it into the ones that you want. And if for whatever reason that's not hitting, but you still feel compelled, like, no, these are good stories. These need to be out there. Um, I would love to do that. I've worked at literary magazines. I've worked at university presses. I've been an editor for a long time. I know I've seen a lot of good manuscripts get passed over, and I've seen others that, for whatever reason, they somehow make it, and maybe there's not room. So yeah, it's kind of an open-ended thing. So, fiction, poetry, stories, novels. I don't know. I just if it's good, you know what I mean? That's sort of the quality thing. I think we need to stop putting so many limits on art. Um, it's so commercial now. Like all the big publishers it's like three companies own all the publishing in America or something like that. It's like everything else. And so, it's it's very limiting. And yet we have all this great technology now where we can create really fine books and keep overhead fairly low and I've heard people say, like they get a deal with a big New York publisher and they still have to do all their own marketing. If they still have to come up with the blurbs, they still have to come up with the cover art. They're still doing all this work themselves for, a major publisher. And it's like, well, if you've got to do all that work yourself, why not have control of it and maybe see it out there. So yeah.
That is
And
awesome. Okay.
yeah, I was just gonna say for me too, once that decision was made, my desire to write increased like 1,000% because there was always that doubt of like, oh, is this good enough? Oh, is this marketable? Oh, is anyone gonna want to read this? Um, and once that obstacle was kind of removed, then it's just like, well, I've got this novel finished. Now I've got an idea for another novel. Now I've got, well, what about this? And maybe they'll become something and maybe they won't, but it feels like that feeling when I first got into writing and didn't know any better, where it's just like I just want to create and tell stories and see if I can get them out there. So yeah, um, yeah. So
That is so terrific. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with us tonight. Oh my goodness. And thank you, readers, all readers, for your contributions to tonight's virtual open mic night. And also, James Allen Gill, congratulations again on Not Dark Yet. So, kind of been wrapping things up. The Pat Conroy Literary Center calendar is always jam-packed with goodness, from the Silent Book Reading Club, along with numerous workshops and capstone events. A couple of mentions for upcoming special events: May 14th. New York Times bestselling novelist Mary Alice Monroe in conversation with Cassandra King. And Camp Conroy is on the horizon. So be sure to check that out for all the details. Again, on the Pat Conroy Literary Center website and Facebook page. So, on behalf of Executive Director Jonathan Haupt, the Pat Conroy Literary Center, I say thank you again and good night.